Good morning or afternoon to everyone, depending on where you happen to be located. I'm so glad everyone was able to join us for what I know will just be an incredible discussion today. For those who I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Netta Meltzer. I'm the National Vice President of Community Engagement with Zioness Movement. And you're joining us today for the second installment of a new series that we've called People of the Book, Jewish Authors, Progressive Issues. Each quarter, this series features today's most compelling authors writing at the intersections of the progressive and Zionist movements and related issues. And today, we're honoring Mizrahi Heritage Month by diving into The Wrong Kind of Jew, a Mizrahi Manifesto by the brilliant Hen Mazzig. Hen Mazzig is a globally recognized speaker, educator, digital influencer. Over 100 million users have interacted with his content online. For a decade, he's been educating on Jews with a focus on the Middle East and North Africa, and is credited by historians as the founder of Mizrahi Heritage Month that we're celebrating today. He's appeared as an expert on Jewish issues on 4 continents, over 500 college campuses, BBC, Sky News, TEDx, and countless Shabbat dinners. And his writing has appeared in LA Times, Newsweek, NBC News, Haaretz, The Forward, Jewish Chronicle, International Business Times, and numerous other publications. And he was actually named Allgemeiner's top 100 people positively influencing Jewish life in 2018 and 2021, the top 50 online pro-Israel influencers, top 50 LGBTQ plus influencers. And for his advocacy, he recently was awarded Camera's Portrait in Courage Award. So we are so excited to be diving into his first book today. And to get us going, I will turn it over to Zioness Executive Director Amanda Berman.
Hello, it's so wonderful to be here. I've been looking forward to this event since we started planning it. And when Hen's book came out, it was such a priority for us to make sure that we were offering this conversation to the Zionesses out there. So Hen, it's so amazing to have you, my dear friend. Thank you for joining us today. And I wanted to start by saying, you know, we're about halfway, a little more than halfway through Mizrahi Heritage Month. We at Zioness are so glad to know there is a month that honors Mizrahi history because the story of the Jewish people is just simply not complete without it. And your book details and describes the history, the culture, the collective identity of, you know, what it means to be Mizrahi. Can you tell us a bit about the genesis of a Mizrahi Heritage Month? Do you think it's been successful in accomplishing its goals and in bringing visibility to Mizrahi heritage and history?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, my dear friend. People probably don't know, but Amanda and I go back way, I won't say how long because people will guess our age, and we don't want that. But we know for a long time. So thank you for having me and for all of your incredible work with Zioness. It's an honor to join you today. One of the sentences in my bios is referring to how historians credit me as the founder of Mizrahi Heritage Month. I'm not the founder of Mizrahi Heritage Month, but I have been the one popularizing it. If you read my book, I'm speaking about how 2 professors that are quite anti-Israel with their opinions and are not Mizrahim, actually wrote a whole article about how Mizrahi identity is invented identity. One of them is teaching in George Washington, another one, I don't know where he's teaching now, but both of those professors were very, I mean, the ideas that they brought up was that the Israeli government manufactured Mizrahi identity that were actually Arab Jews, which another issue that I talk about, how Jews never referred to themselves as Arabs. We were a minority, a protected minority until the ruling countries did not want to protect us anymore. So when I think the first time that I heard about Mizrahi Heritage Month was in maybe 2015, when I saw that Jimena, the Jews indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa, it's an organization that advocates for Mizrahi Jews, one of the only ones out there that has actually consistently been outspoken about it. They had Mizrahi Heritage Month and no one ever celebrated it. And I saw it on their website and I started sharing it on social media. And every year I made a video and I started posting about it. And throughout my work in the last, I've been writing about these issues, about Jewish issues, Israel, anti-Semitism, Mizrahi Jews, LGBTQ rights, how all of this intersects for over a decade now. And I always try to bring my experience into my writings. And I think someone was telling me how the first time the Farhud was mentioned in LA Times or NBC News was in my articles, which is super important. I mean, people are not talking about this pogrom that happened in 1941 to the Jews of Iraq and how hundreds of Jews were killed and thousands were injured. So it's really important that we bring in visibility and that we speak about these issues. And that's what I'm trying to do in my work. And that's how I started really popularizing Mizrahi Heritage Month, and then being credited by people that really don't like me as the founder of it. And you know what? I'll take pride in it. Yeah, I'm definitely one of the people that made this month what it is today.
That's awesome. Always a trailblazer. So beyond the obvious, which is that this is your story and your family's history, and you see the challenges as an activist in not identifying and recognizing and honoring Mizrahi heritage, what inspired you to write this book, and how has the reception been? Is what you were expecting, or is it different? Is it better or worse? Like, how do you feel about, and I know you talk in the book about some of the challenges in general and the people who've been trying to erase Mizrahi history. Like, is that coming up in response to the book, or are you getting the feedback that I gave you, which is that I learned so much from this book? I think it's really important for everyone to read because, as I said already, Jewish history is not complete without Mizrahi heritage. So say more.
Yeah, thank you for that, for the kind words. And I haven't gotten much pushback so far. I'm still waiting. I'm sure it just takes them some time to read. So after they'll read some of it.
It's not a long read. It's not a long read. If they had something to say, they would have said it already.
I know. So maybe it's just it's too much for them to come back at me. I mean, the people that are the usual suspects that always come against me. So my book was not a response to that. It was not direct response to the erasure that I face online and the attacks that I've faced offline and online by students, by anti-Israel activists, by groups that really dislike or really hate the fact that Jews exist and that we all started from the Middle East and that we have indigenous connection to this land. That it's something that a lot of people are still pushing back against. And the book was not directly respond to them. It was more because I saw that when I was researching for any article that I'm writing, I realized that there aren't many books in English that really catalog the story of the Jews in the Middle East and North Africa, or at least not doing it in a personal way. It often feels like, and I'm seeing it with American Sephardic Jewish organizations, that it's almost like they want to put Sephardi and Mizrahi Jewish identity in a museum under a glass. They don't want us to really engage with it. They want us to look at it and look at Ladino and look at at our history and our culture, but just don't engage with it. Don't really touch it. And I wanted to touch it. I wanted people to really feel it, and to understand Mizrahi history, you have to feel it, because that's really what Mizrahi are all about leading with your heart and really feeling feelings, not just discussing them. And that's what I was trying to do with the book. And I think that I'm getting some really positive feedback from people that really like it. I was just talking to a friend of mine. She said that her mom read my book, and I didn't even know that her mom was interested. And she said her mom loved it, but she said, the last 2 chapters, you sound very angry. And I said, I think that I am kind of angry. There's a lot of anger, but I'm trying to bring it out of place of love and out of place of not appeasement, rather bringing people together and bridging a lot of the misunderstandings that we have about Mizrahim, that the world has about us. But yeah, Manifesto is always a bit more gritty and rough, and I think that's what probably some people will find in the last part of the book.
I actually felt, and maybe it's because of how well I know you, but I could see your personality in the book. Like I felt like it was very, I didn't read anger, I read emotion. And this is very emotional for you because, again, it's your literal story that you're sharing, and that takes vulnerability, and it's hard to do, especially given some of the pushback that you've faced your whole career. So I think it actually is one of the things that I liked best is, just as you said, that you want people to feel it and to understand it in the same way that obviously no one's going to understand your lived experience the way that you do, but you're sharing it in such a way that people can know you, and that can help them know more about your culture that you're sharing them. Yeah. So something that you just touched upon, and I would love for you to go a little deeper on, is you said that it sometimes feels like people want to put Mizrahi and Sephardi identity in a museum. Can you kind of express something that, comes up actually a lot in my conversations, that there is a conflation of Sephardi identity and Mizrahi identity, that people just think it's kind of all the same thing, that it's like Ashkenazi and everyone else. And it's not. And you talk a lot about that. And obviously there's overlap, and there's overlap for all of us, right? There is actually a shared Jewish lived experience. And then there's also very distinct lived experiences of different Jews from different places. So tell us a little bit about that, about the Sephardic Mizrahi divide, where there's overlap and where they're totally not the same thing.
Right. Well, before we get to that, I'll touch on the other point that you mentioned, that I'm seeing that online very often. Whenever I speak about Mizrahi Jews, someone would comment, well, we're all Jews. Like let's stop dividing ourselves. And it's not meant to divide us. It's about understanding differences, and through this, and that's what I'm trying to do in the book constantly, is to bring people together through recognizing how beautiful and diverse our community is. And to speak about Mizrahi Jews does not mean that we're ignoring or discrediting Ashkenazi Jews. It's the other way around completely. We're trying to just enrich the Jewish story with more stories of different Jews, and it's just like, and that's I'm always puzzled by people that while they can recognize why Jews need to fight anti-Semitism and why it's okay for Jews to understand that we are one people in a community and that we're different from non-Jews, from Christians, from Muslims, from other communities, we are very unique. Why is it a problem for them to see that within the Jewish community, there's also unique groups of people that are different? And one of those groups is really the Sephardim and Mizrahim. And I touch on it in the book, in my book at length, but the short answer is that Sephardi usually refers to, and that's really, I'm painting it with a wide brush, and I know that some people might disagree, and that's okay. We're Jews, but in general, Sephardi meaning that you have more. Well, first of all, Sephard means Spain. Sephardi means Spanish. That's the literal translation, and it's more often associated with the communities that left Spain after the Spanish Inquisition. A lot of them ended up in North Africa, and they shared some of the cultures with the North African Jewish communities there. So the way that they're praying, the melodies, the piyutim, but the Sephardi identity, Sephardi Jews became very much associated with religious practices. And even the Rambam, the Maimonides, when he was actually from Spain, and then he moved to Iraq, and he settled in Iraq. He was a Sephardi Jew, and that's where he wrote a lot of the books that we're following today, like the Talmud and others. It was written in Babylon, in Iraq, but he was a Sephardi Jew, and the melodies and the ideas that he brought up were very Sephardi. That the term Mizrahi comes from Edot HaMizrach, the people of the East. Mizrahi means Eastern. And there are many Jewish communities that are not really affiliated with, or not really related, other than the Jewish relation, of course, to the Sephardic Jewish communities. While they live together, if you look at North Africa and Tunisia, there was such a separation between the Jews that reside in North Africa before the Spanish Inquisition and the Sephardi Jewish communities that came later on. And they mixed, and the culture was, of course, mixed, but the Sephardi Jews that were from Spain were speaking Ladino, and there was a lot of differences between those communities. My family, an example, the Hen Mazzig Jews were there from the time that they were the first inhabitants of North Africa. So they really did not have this relationship. So the term Mizrahi, I feel like, really encapsulated more of the culture and the tradition and the identity that today people, you can be a Mizrahi Jew without going to the synagogue and without praying, without believing in God, but you're still a Mizrahi Jew. And I think that this is why Mizrahi is a term that younger Jewish Mizrahim are feeling like can really represents us, because we have some sort of Judeo-Arabic, we have shared culture and cuisine, and we also have the same experience of being forced out from those countries because we were Jews, because we were dhimmis, from North Africa to Iraq through Iran. I think this is why Mizrahi identity is one that many Jews from many countries can really relate to. But I think the important thing is also that we are coming together as an identity, because then we have, while there's a difference between a Moroccan Jew and Iranian Jew, between their experience, there's so many similarities that coming together gives us a better platform to advocate for recognition and for our rights and for visibility within the Jewish community and outside the Jewish community.
So something that I talk about a lot and that I really wish more people would understand, and this is probably the people on this call already know this, but like for the people who feel the need to say that what you're doing is divisive or like you're trying to pit Jewish communities against each other, you know, we're all Zionists, right? Like at least the people on this call, I think, are probably all Zionists. And when we are talking about Zionism and what it means to Jewish identity, I often talk about the fact that it's not just Herzl, not to minimize Herzl, who is a pioneer, and thank God for Theodor Herzl, right? Every day, thank God for Theodor Herzl. But Herzl did, first of all, didn't come up with the word Zionism, Nathan Birnbaum did, but he didn't pull it out of thin air, right? Like we are the people of Zion, we are the children of Zion, we are all indigenous to the land of Israel, and I want to come back to that. But our story, in understanding both Jewish indigeneity to Israel and the exile, it's so important and actually so powerful to highlight the fact that Jews exiled from the land of Israel went everywhere. And so there are all of these different Jewish communities all over the world that weren't in touch. They didn't have Twitter, they didn't have WhatsApp, right? Like they weren't messaging each other. They didn't even know each other existed, but they had these shared cultures, shared practices, shared worship, right? Always longing for Jerusalem, always praying in the direction of Jerusalem. But also living in different societies, you have different lived experiences. And I actually think that that is truly one of the strongest things and most beautiful things, the diversity of the Jewish community, and the fact that we're all Jews and that we've all survived despite the unbelievable persecution and oppression that every Jewish community has faced, no matter where they've lived, is, I think, one of the strongest arguments for our Zionist identities and our roots and our history and our story. So it's actually so dangerous for the work that we do as people who are advocating for Zionism as part of Jewish identity to erase the different lived experiences of Jewish communities that went to different places. And so just thank you for always highlighting that, because it's just something, it doesn't make sense to me. I understand people feel like they need their victimhood to be the most victimhood of all the victimhoods. I understand it psychologically, like we all have inherited trauma and like we feel the need to have it recognized. And I actually get that. I think it's a psychological thing that is beyond kind of parsing in this kind of context, but really understanding that there's different communities and that we all make up the Jewish people that are all from the land of Israel and long to return to Israel, like that is an argument that people can't take away from us. It's just up to us to make sure that we're making it properly. Anyway, so thank you for explaining that sort of distinction. Yeah. And, you know, just, sorry, this cough, along the same lines of, you know, people conflating Mizrahi and Sephardi. It's kind of the inverse of this, but something you talk a lot about is the fact that people are so comfortable using Ashkenazi as an umbrella term, despite the fact that like the Jews of Berlin, as you say, have a totally different lived experience from, you know, the Jews that lived in shtetls in Ukraine and Russia. Like it's a very different, right? Like cosmopolitan versus shtetl life, like totally different experience. But we use Ashkenazi to cover, right? Like all of the Jews of Europe in the last couple centuries. So why is it that you think that when you and other people who are advocating for an understanding of Mizrahi heritage, that there is such discomfort in using a term like Mizrahi, even by people who don't think twice about using the term Ashkenazi?
Yeah, and we've spoke about it. I think when you read the part about this Twitter argument that I had with, I won't mention the name, but a rabbi that said, what is the connection between Mizrahim? You're all from different places. Why should I, you know, what does make, and he used this incredibly offensive term that he said, you have the Cubana gene, which was just, I mean, it was, I just couldn't believe my eyes reading this this tweet from this rabbi that, as you said, would never argue with anyone saying, you know, Ashkenazi identity is valid one, and we all speak Yiddish and we all have the same we all have suffered by the same oppressor, by the Nazis. Were all forced out from our land in the same way from where we lived, and we have this shared experience that we can recognize. But when it comes to Mizrahim, there's such a pushback from within our community and outside. I think from outside the community, the reason that we're getting this pushback is because people that have been often the center of the conversation, and when we speak about what it means to be Jewish, there was only one thing. There was only one type of food. There was only one type of, you know, we speak about Yiddish, we speak about bagels and gefilte fish. I had nothing to do with this growing up, and so many other Jews have nothing to do with this specific identity. Of course, we're Jewish and we can enjoy this because we're all part of the same tribe, and I'm absolutely, I'm beside myself with happiness when non-Mizrahim are celebrating Mizrahi culture and eating Mizrahi food. It's our food, it's Israeli food today, and we're all sharing it. But it's very important to note that it's different, and that we grew up, and I write about it in my book, that I grew up praying that one day I'll turn Ashkenazi. Like I said, that this was the one thing that people asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said Ashkenazi, because I thought that this was something that you really want to be, because this is the dominant Jewish identity, and this is what Jews are, or at least that's how they are presented in the media and in pop culture. We don't get much representation. I'll agree on that, but Mizrahi Jews, millions of people. It's not just a small, tiny minority. It's half of the Jews in Israel. It's almost quarter, according to recent numbers, which are, there's still not really a proper survey of American Jewish identities, and still need to be done. And I think the Jews of Color initiatives have been trying to do that, and others. But the numbers, it means that we are millions of Jews from this community that deserve to be recognized. Every minority within our community definitely should be recognized as well. But I think it's really telling that this community has been ignored for so long. I'm sorry, you had another question, and I lost my train of thoughts.
I think it was just basically, why do you think there's such discomfort using the term Mizrahi, especially by people who are so comfortable using the term Ashkenazi, given that within both communities, broadly speaking, there are lots of different lived experiences?
Right. And I had a follow-up on that, because I remember, I think I wrote about this as well, that I arranged an event, online event, a Zoom call with diversity of Jewish women that have been in powerful positions. So I had Representative Elmar Hernandez, I had Marina Shija, a Native American Jewish activist, and I had Ashager Orero and Rabbi Sandra. And this diversity of Jewish women. So first of all, I got a lot of pushback. Why is it all women? Why don't you bring men? And that's also I was like, okay, really,
men are so persecuted in the world.
Right? And then the other thing,
men have a voice and a platform.
Yeah, for sure. We need a men's rights group. But then the second part was that, then the second part that really shocked me was one person, someone that very high up in the Jewish organization world, reached out to me and said, are you going to have Ashkenazi Jews on the panel as well? And I said, well, I think that Rabbi Sandra identifies as Ashkenazi Jew. She also, that's her identity. The fact that she's Black is just another layer of her identity, but there are many Black Ashkenazi Jews. And she responded saying, well, you know what I meant. And I said, no, I don't know what you mean. Do you want to tell me exactly what you meant? And then she said, someone that looks like my kids. And then, that was the reminder for me that besides the racism that was very obvious, just the idea that we can celebrate our identities, even if it is very similar to ours, is just really telling that I don't think it's about Ashkenazi Jews feeling like Ashkenazi is not being celebrated. There's something else there by the people that are pushing back against it. So, yeah.
So, okay, this brings us to a really interesting point, an important and very sensitive one, which is about Jewish whiteness. And what I would say as the whiter person on the call is there is a particular, it's not to say that we as Ashkenazi white presenting Jews don't ever have platforms. Of course not. We have the majority of the platforms. There is, as you know, a problem in American society when it comes to the anti-Semitism that calls Jews white, privileged, powerful oppressors, and that doesn't recognize that while people who look like me have a privilege and appear in the world as white, that it's conditional, that it hasn't protected our community historically ever before, that Jews continue to be the victim of the vast majority of religiously motivated hate crimes in America, despite most American Jews presenting as white. So how do you think about the whiteness argument, given the really complex area that you are working in this particular conversation?
Yeah, I love that. Just soft questions, just easy topics.
I just wanted to, I wanted to save the gotchas for later.
Yeah, so I think we need to understand what white means, right? And white being white in America or in Western societies that are predominantly white and Christian means being part of this and enjoying the privilege of being part of this dominated identity. The same way that being Arab and Muslim in the Middle East meant being part of this dominant identity that gave you a lot of privilege with it. In the Middle East, it was privilege like you could ride a horse, you could own properties that were taller than other properties, but Jews did not have that, and other minorities did not have that in the Middle East. And in America, whiteness means that you are also benefit of privilege and some privilege, but you have to the idea that Jews are white is conditional. I had this post on social media after this blogger interviewed a Mizrahi Jewish woman and a black blogger, black podcaster. And she interviewed this Mizrahi Jewish woman and she said, you all are just passing into whiteness. You get a nose job, you change your name, and you get a creatine treatment, and you just pass into whiteness. So the question is, why do Jewish women feel like they have to do it? Maybe they're not really benefiting from white privilege in the full extent. So we can have the conversation about how much privilege Jews can get, but they can't get the full privilege of what it means to be white in America today. And I think that's the important distinction. And that's why we can't just use the term white or saying there's white Jews, because I think that it's a contradiction in the term itself. You can't be also benefiting from being white and Christian in America and still reminded every day or every week, every Sunday, that you are still a minority in this country, or every Christmas, or every time you have to think about your last name or getting creatine treatment. Why do you feel like you need to do it? Why do you need to think twice? I mean, and then there's the argument, well, that's only if you're a religious Jew and wearing a kippah or presenting as Jewish. No, it doesn't matter if you are wearing a kippah or not. As a Jewish person, you should be allowed to partake in your culture and your traditions and your religious practices without thinking twice. And if you have to think twice, then it means that you are not really benefiting from being part of the dominant and powerful and privileged groups in society. And I think that's the first part. And the second part, of course, as you mentioned, Jews in living memory have been killed in the millions because we were not white. And that's what Aryan meant in the Holocaust. It was being white and being part of the dominant Aryan race. Of course, we know its invention and so on, but that was why we face a genocide. So of course, Jews should and are taking issue with the idea that we are benefiting from being white, and that's something that we need to listen to. And with all that being said, we can also recognize that there are Jews that are Jews of color, and that there are Black Jews, and that they have completely different experience than other Jews. Black Jews have completely different experience than my experience as a Mizrahi Jew, or from the experience of Mexican Jews. So we need to really be able to just understand that there's different experiences, and it doesn't say anything. Me speaking about my experience does not take away from any other experience or the importance of these experiences. And I do think that Yiddish should be maintained. And I go to Yiddish theater and I enjoy some Ashkenazi food.
Same.
But I do think that we need to make more room, and the more room we're making for other experiences, and the more we listen to one another, I think it will make our community so much stronger. And it will be the key. I think that Mizrahi Jews and our experience is really the key to better understanding Israel and the Middle East today in the West. And I think that us ignoring it or not really speaking about it because of fear that we might not seem white, or that we might not pass into whiteness as we hope that we will. The sad truth is that we've never passed into whiteness, and even this conditional whiteness that we received will not save us, and it hasn't saved us. So we need to be who we are and be authentic. And I think that's the most important thing. I work with social media influencers as part of Tel Aviv Institute, my organization. We train influencers to speak up online about anti-Semitism. And I always say, everything online is so fake. Just be authentic, be who you are. And the more you are who you are, and I had to learn that through coming out as a gay person. One of the chapters in the book is called Coming Out Twice, because I had to come out as Mizrahi as well and as Jewish. And today, when I live in London, I have to come out as Israeli every time I to the cafe because someone will ask me, and I decided to just not be ashamed of who I am. And the more I'm proud, the more other people will react to it. And it doesn't mean safety, but it means that you're going to have much better life and much easier life. And I mean, it's definitely not safety. We saw what happened in Colorado just yesterday, and that's a reminder that minorities are still not free and still not safe. But we have to be able to be who we are.
Yeah, so much of that. I want to quote my dear friend Ebony Williams, who recently did a podcast about anti-Semitism. She's a Black woman, a lawyer, a newscaster, a public figure, a total rock star. She recently just did a podcast about the anti-Semitism, the Kyrie Irving situation and the anti-Semitism, and she was talking about her own advocacy as an ally to the Jewish community, and she was talking about Sephardic Jews and Mizrahi Jews and Ashkenazi Jews. And I don't remember if she made the point on the podcast, but she made it in a conversation with me that these issues are just so complicated, as you know, right? Like Ashkenazi does not mean white. This is such a common misconception. Probably the vast majority of Ashkenazi Jews present as white, but not all of them, as we know. And, you know, and some people who identify as Mizrahi may look more white than, you know, than some Ashkenazi Jews. So whiteness, as you said, is just, it's such a complicated thing. These are about power structures more than anything else. And white, you know, today means something different than it did in 1930s Germany, of course, right? So like, anyway, the thing that Ebony said that made me laugh and that I wanted to share is that she was talking to her community, which is the African-American community. And she said, if you don't even know these terms that I'm telling you about Ashkenazi and Sephardi and Ethiopian Jews, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you haven't done the reading and you shouldn't be having this conversation. Like, do the reading and then give me a call. And I just think that's something to kind of think about. I mean, she said it was so funny, I was laughing, but it's so important for people to understand these issues are just way, way, way more complicated than the boxes, the neat boxes that people want to fit us in as a community. And I think you do such a beautiful job in this book of like breaking that down. And it's something, you know, we all need to do as Jews, but if you're not an expert on these issues, it's totally fine, but refer to the experts, right? Like, don't try to make the arguments on your own because you're going to end up doing damage.
100%.
So a kind of similar question, it's kind of in the same vein as this, is something you touched on already about the term Arab Jew. And I wanted to share with full disclosure, we post every year, we have these awareness days at Zioness that we post on social media. And one of them is the birthday of Albert Memmi, the famed Tunisian Jewish author. And he self-identified as an Arab Jew, a very proud Jew. And I was actually reviewing the caption for the Albert Memmi post just yesterday after having read your book. And I was like, wait, we probably shouldn't use this term. And I wonder if Albert Memmi would use it now, knowing, you know, the context that we live in today. Like, why do you think, and you don't, I don't know if you know anything about Albert Memmi's self-identification as an Arab Jew, you do, but, you know, I was just curious for you to talk a bit about that term, why it creates problems in your advocacy, why it's not actually really representative, and like whether maybe, you know, decades ago it had a different understanding than it does now, or a different meaning for people's identities than it might now.
Right, that's an excellent point. And first of all, I'll say that everyone can identify as they wish. I'm not the identity police, and if you're identifying as an Arab Jew or a Muslim Jew, I read that somewhere as well. It's fine. People can identify as they want. I think that the more accurate term for Jews from the Middle East and North Africa that lived in Arab countries is Mizrahi, because Adot Mizrach has been a term that has been used, that we use for hundreds of years, and the term Arab Jew is a quite very young and new term, and new in terms of the history of those communities in this area. I think that the first reason why we've never been really Arab Jews is because we always lived as dhimmis, as minority, and for a Jewish person to call themselves Arab is in the Middle East is a joke for Arabs, because it's, you know, how dare you use this term that is not given to you? You're not a Muslim, and that means that you're not part of the dominated majority of those countries. So, you know, if you look at other minorities, indigenous religious minorities in the Middle East that lived side by side with the Jewish and Arabs and Muslims in this area, like the Yazidis, they'll never say that they are Arab Yazidis. They'll get really upset if you say that to them. Or the Copts. There's actually a whole quote in my book from a whole section I took from a cult leader in Egypt, that he's talking about how they're not Arabs, that they're a minority, an indigenous and religious minority, but they have their own identity. The same thing with Kurds. If you'll ask a Kurd if they're Arab Kurds, they will probably get even more outraged than the other minorities. So I think it's really important to also recognize that Jews are an indigenous religious minority in the Middle East, and they have their own unique identity. And the Arab world today, we're seeing all those countries, and we think that they've been there for thousands of years, but they haven't. They are all new countries. They've been all, invented recently. Maybe Egypt and other countries that have more history, but the names of the countries that we see today, they're all a result of Arab imperialism, of Muslim imperialism, that took over the Middle East today. And I know that this is so sensitive, and we're trying in the West not to speak about imperialism if it's not white, but there is imperialism of people of color, and I've suffered from it. My family has suffered from it. If you ask Hen Mazzig, my community in North Africa, they have suffered from it so much so that some of them even believe that it's actually the good thing for them to have their resources and their land taken by the armies of that came from Arabia to take over this area. And that's really a problem. It's a serious problem. But until recently, Tunisia did not even recognize Tamazight, which is the most spoken language in Tunisia, and they completely ignore them. And after a long fight of Amazigh people, they've changed it. So with all that being said, we have never been Arabs. When there's a book actually from this young Mizrahi Jewish or Arab, he identifies as an Arab Jew, that writes. He wrote a whole book about Arab identity, and then he speaks with his grandmother the same way that I did for my book. And his grandmother is saying to him, "We were never Arabs. Don't use this term." And he said, "Oh, she was so whitewashed by imperialism," which is the biggest joke, because he's the one that's been brainwashed by this imperialism that we forgot. I think that those people that are saying it either forgot or don't understand the connotation that what the term Arab means, and how much we suffered, and minorities, indigenous religious minorities in the Middle East still suffer today from Arab imperialism, and the fact that there is an Arab empire, that we never belonged to it, and we never received the benefits of being an Arab because we weren't. And it's the same thing. That's why I can understand the whole argument about whiteness in America so well, because I think that's the same thing. There are some Mizrahi Jews that will say that they're Arabs, just like there are some Jews that will identify as white, but the term itself does not really represent the experience of those communities.
So well said. So I know there was a lot of great questions. I just have one more that I think is really important, and I know it's a big focus of the book, which is that it's a very challenging political moment in Israel, especially for those of us who identify as progressive and Zionist. And you talk a lot in the book about the discrimination that Mizrahi Jews in Israel face and how it contributes to the domestic political dynamics there. And as you know, Zioness doesn't talk about Israeli domestic politics or the conflict or anything going on in the Middle East. But I think, having you here, it would really be a shame not to have you explain, how that racism that Mizrahi Jews have experienced, and maybe racism isn't even the right term, because, Jewish racialization of Jews is always problematic. But there's discrimination. There's definitely an othering of Jews in Israel. It happens to Russian Jews, it's to immigrants. It's not, this is a problem that happens in every country. I had someone ask me at an event the other day, telling me they were really heartbroken as someone who had experienced displacement as a result of Hurricane Katrina, which I know Daryl on our team, is from New Orleans and also has heart-wrenching stories about Hurricane Katrina. And this woman said after having experienced what she did, she felt so sensitive to the refugee status of Palestinians. And I said, "Did you know about the refugee status of Mizrahi Jews?" And she said, "But there's so much racism in Israel." I said, "There is. And tell me a country in which there isn't. I would love for us to have a model of a country in which there's no racism, and where the racism doesn't contribute to the politics of the country." So this is really, I think, just something as we approach a new governing coalition in Israel, it's really important to understand what's actually going on there and how we got here.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it's been the challenge in writing the book, because I'm trying to advocate, or in general in doing this work, that I always feel like, okay, I have to speak about discrimination of the Jewish people anti-Semitism, but within our community, there's also discrimination, and also within Mizrahi Jews, there's also discrimination. If you speak to my uncle was supposed to marry. My mom has 11 brothers and sisters, 12, and she had to. And one of my uncle was supposed to marry a Moroccan Jewish woman, and my grandma was so upset and so angry because she didn't want him to marry a Moroccan woman because it's beneath Iraqi Jews to marry a Moroccan woman. And even within Moroccan Jewish communities, or even within Iraqi Jews, you have, my grandmother is from Baghdad, and whenever someone is from Basra, a different city, she's always saying, "Oh, those people they're not really Iraqi Jews like we are." So within communities, there's always this racial or social or sociological hierarchy, I guess, and always try to place yourself above someone else, which is a problem, and we need to recognize it. And I think also in Israel it's a problem, but I don't like when people are using this as a weapon. I mean, if you really care about racism in Israel, go and speak about these issues and advocate for a change and make a difference, but don't you bring it up every time we tweet about anti-Semitism, say, "Oh wait, but what about racism in Israel?" And that happens to me all the time. It's a painful issue. I mean, I speak about this in the book, how much racism I faced, it is racism, I guess, because it's about othering, but it's othering of Jews. And I think that the problem is that majority of Jews in Israel are Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, and they've been discriminated. We've been discriminated in a way that that minorities would be discriminated because they're a minority and they have less power, but we were a majority in the sense that we were discriminated by a minority within Israel, which is an issue, but we weren't discriminated. I mean, I would say that there's a real work. There's work to do to make sure that Mizrahi Jews are represented in every walk of life. There's still haven't been a president of Israeli university ever that was Mizrahi. There was one president that was half Iraqi. There was never a head of Israeli banks or Israeli Olympic championship committees or a prime minister. And I think there is a room I hope that one day new leadership will emerge of Mizrahi Jews that will be represented. But as a majority of Jews in Israel, to be so underrepresented is a real problem, and we need to recognize that and work for a change. And yeah, I think, I have a part of the book that I was going to read. Can I read it now?
Yeah, so sorry, I forgot about it at the beginning, and then we just got so into the
No, I think it fits really perfectly.
Okay,
so I'm writing about the time that I worked in Seattle for a pro-Israel organization, Hasbara group, not Hasbara, they're not called Hasbara, a different group that was doing Hasbara, and speaking about the challenges of being Mizrahi and how they were saying you have to just use your identity to speak about what the Arabs did to you, as if it's a game. There's only two sides here, and if you want to speak about your identity, you have to use it in this way. So I'll read. I didn't respond well to their demands. I insisted on speaking from a true personal place. These were my stories and my beliefs. I couldn't then, and I still can't, parrot other people's talking points to serve other people's agenda. The more I spoke about my family story, the prouder I felt about my collective experience. My second coming out was well underway before I even knew it. Just jumping a bit. I didn't care about that anymore because I just wanted to get the truth out there. People needed to know. Today, the story of Mizrahi Jews is being discussed in English-speaking countries more than ever before. I'd like to believe that I have had something to do with that trend. Standing on the shoulders of a few great and brave Mizrahim who chronicled this history in Hebrew and French. Today, I try my best to find nuance in everything I write and share. I'm critical of many inequalities my community faces, but I do not come from a place of resentment or hate. As James Baldwin put it, I love America more than any other country in the world. Exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. I too love my country and my people. I love them so much that I pledge to continue improving not only their lives, but the very system on which their livelihood and freedom depends. In the face of constant criticism, the easiest thing to do would be to lie down and just give up. But I've never been one to take the easy path. It's from my book. Buy it.
Yes, everyone should definitely buy the book. So we're going to do a little bit of Q&A. and that you're in charge of Q&A.
I am in charge of Q&A, and we will have about 10 minutes left now, so we will not get to all these amazing questions. This discussion has been so deep and important that we didn't want to cut it off too early. But I will pull a couple of the important questions out. Karen asks, how can Ashkenazi Jews be better about uplifting Mizrahi voices, history, culture, etc.?
Well, I mean, the fact that you're here is a great first step. I think that speaking about this issue in outside of our community, but also within our community, when you hear comments that are being thrown around about Jewish identity that is just one thing, or really discrediting the existence of Mizrahi Jews, speak up about it. I want people to see Mizrahim and to discuss us and to bring this. You know, I always ask my grandmother. She lost everything she had in Iraq, and I told her, I'm going around the world and I'm speaking about your story. What would you like people to do? And she said, and I asked, like, do you want justice? Do you want your land back? Do you want money back? Do you want your property back? And she always said, like, the justice that I have is to have my family and to have a country that is safe, that I can live in, and that I don't have to fear for my life. But the one thing that if you ask her, another thing is that she wants people to know what happened to them. That's the one thing that she really feel like has been from everything that was robbed from them. Their story was the one thing that was, I think, the hardest to believe that people would erase us. So I would love for people to speak about us more, because I feel like this would really make a difference for our community. The more people recognize our existence and who we are, the better representation we'll get. And that will be, you know, that's my promise to my grandmother, and I'm trying to fulfill it with my work as well.
Thank you. And Shayna asks, tell us a little bit about your experience being Mizrahi in Israel. Is there issues there? What is Israel doing to promote equality among diverse Jewish communities within the country?
Yeah, I write about it at length in the book about the issues within Israel of Mizrahi Jews. Some of those issues, yes, while we are speaking about Mizrahi Jews, we know that Romanian Jews, Russian Jews, Ethiopian Jews are also suffering from discrimination and challenges and hardships. But the fact that Mizrahi Jews is such a big group of people within the country that are still underrepresented. And if you're looking at VAR report, there's a report that really reviews the financial and the economic situation of Jews from different minorities. And Mizrahi Jews are still the first, second, and third generation Mizrahi Jews in Israel are still paid 30% less than Ashkenazi Jews, first, second, and third generation in Israel, and they are a minority within this. I mean, Ashkenazim are a minority in Israel compared to Mizrahi Jews, and we are still getting paid so low, and that's a real issue. I think that we need to really work to change, and it's not racial segregation or racial, you know, it's not because you're Mizrahi, you're being put in a place and then you're going to be prevented from getting any advancement in life. It's more of the mobility and it is where you are living physically. And if you live in the periphery in Israel, and I know that when American Jews come to Israel, they usually go to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and they're not really going to Yerucham or Afula or the Krayot. This is the cities where Mizrahi Jews live. And if you are living in the city, you would probably stay in the city, and when you go to high school, you will the options of majors that you can study would be very limited. It's car mechanics and household management, and when you study on these professions, your path is being very much made for you, and it's very hard to get to academia. If you look at academia in Israel today, only 7% of the faculty in Israeli universities is Mizrahi. There is actually a higher rate of Arab Israelis teaching in academia than there are Mizrahim, and that's a real issue. So there's that, and then of course there's the way that Mizrahim are being used as a political football every time there's election. Just now, with the elections, Netanyahu continued to speak about Mizrahi Jews and saying that Likud represents them. I detest Netanyahu and I don't like anything about Likud, and I although my family members do support them, and I asked my family member, how can you support something that is promising you so much for so long? And it hasn't done anything really for Mizrahim. You're still underrepresented. It's been 30 years that Likud has been in power, more than that, and you're still underrepresented. What has Netanyahu done for you? And I think my dad says it, and I wrote it in my book, that the first time that he got the first job that he got, he used to be a car mechanic and a truck driver in the army, because that's what Mizrahi Jews were able to do in the army. But he said the first time that he got a real job as not a real job, rather a profession, not just being a car driver, was when Likud took power in the 70s, and that really changed everything for him. And he says, you'll never understand what it means to have a real the ability to work in a job that can provide for my family, and that's what they remember about Likud. So I think that's why Netanyahu and other Likud members are using this group in the way that they're doing. And I think that the left in Israel has failed Mizrahim so much, and I write about that and about labor as well in my book, and how labor had an opportunity to include Mizrahim, and every time Mizrahim reached a powerful position in labor, the party just really destroyed itself in the voting. They didn't get enough votes to get into the Knesset. And it's an interesting, I mean, I think that the left has really failed Mizrahim. And if the left in Israel will recognize that they have an opportunity to speak to Mizrahim and include them as part of the platform, then they might have a chance to win elections. But so far, it's just Netanyahu is doing it, and the left is saying, well, Mizrahim are just like all of us. Let's ignore the situation that is really, there's a lot of work to be done for this community.
We just have about 5 minutes left, but what you are talking about right now segues really nicely into another question, which comes from Donna, and it says, is there a Mizrahi left voice in Israel, or we only hear about Mizrahim on the right? And do they have a voice? Is there a place for them on the left in Israel?
Yes, absolutely. I think that there is a place on the left for Mizrahi Jews in Israel. Many of the Mizrahi Jewish most vocal voices, I think, are more to the far left in Israel, so much far left that they reject the term Mizrahim and probably will identify as Arabs. But that's an issue. I mean, I don't want to really talk about that. But if you look culturally, there's a group called Ars Poetica. Ars is a derogatory term for a low-class Mizrahi man, and they took it and changed it. And Ars Poetica is a group of poets that are writing beautiful poems about Mizrahi Jews and our experience, from a way of challenging the inequalities that we faced. There were several Mizrahi leaders on the left as well, like Orly Levy Apokasis, I speak about her in the book, and several others that reached Avi Gabay, the former head of Labor, the party. There were many of them that actually reached powerful positions, but the left has continuously failed them. And I think that the left in Israel, there's not much different between right and left in Israel when it comes down to it, really. It's all about security and where do you see the two-state solution, or where, and majority of Israeli Jews actually do support a two-state solution. But I think that the one thing that is different between left and right is really those two groups are fighting for control over the country. And even though Mizrahi Jews feeling like they are represented by Likud, they're not really represented. Yes, there are. There are some Mizrahi MKs, but there were Mizrahi MKs with Yesh Atid as well, probably the same amount of Mizrahim, but they didn't use it as Netanyahu used it in the subtext of everything they were saying. So I feel like I'm getting too much into politics, but I hope that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. And a note from some of the folks on the chat that they will keep spreading the word as you asked us all to do in this conversation. I think one last very quick question from Justin. If Sephardic means Spanish Jews, he says, please forgive my ignorance, but what's the simplest definition you would give of Mizrahi Jews? Is it Jews from Middle East, North Africa? How would you define that? Does that sound right?
Yeah, it's Jews from the Middle East. So it's I would I would be careful about that as well, because we know that all Jews started from the Middle East. We all come from Israel. We had probably the longest diaspora of any people, and that's why it's so hard for people to understand what we really are. But we all came from Israel, so it's important to say that. Mizrahi Jews are Jews with recent descent from the Middle East and North Africa, and Iran as well. I think it's important to mention that. But it's we all started from Israel. We came from Judea. We are, as long as you pray to Jerusalem, as long as you pray towards Israel, as long as you see Israel as part of your identity, as long as you maintain this connection, you are still indigenous to this land. The only way that you can sever this connection is by being anti-Israel or anti-Zionist or being against it. So, yeah.
And if you have not read this yet, you can learn so much more about the Mizrahi culture, the history, and everything that you need to know. Hen, we cannot thank you enough for sharing your work and your wisdom with us. And I just want to thank everyone who joined us here today as well. Zioness is deeply grateful for your engagement, for your support. And we hope to see you at the next installment of People of the Book, Jewish Authors, Progressive Issues, which will be in 2023. Amanda or Hen, any final words to share with our audience? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm muted because I was coughing. I just have a quick follow-up to the last question. It's like a yes or no. Is it accurate to say that Mizrahi Jews all have the same experience of having lived in Arab or Muslim majority countries?
Very similar, like 90%, very similar. We were oppressed as a unit. We came out of those countries as families. We all been dhimmis. We all suffered as being a minority in a Muslim country, and all those countries spoke very similar language. So I would say it's very similar. Yes.
Okay, so all I want to say is just thank you, Hen. I always learn so much from you. I adore you, and I assume everyone here is already following you. But if not, definitely follow Hen. His are among the most nuanced and, genuinely come from a place of understanding and of wanting to help move people, not just about preaching to the choir, right? Like it is our goal and our mandate, I think, as Jews who care about the world, to be out in the world doing good things and then also representing our community positively and effectively. And I think that's what I always learn when I talk to you and see your posts. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for writing this incredible book. Everyone, really, you should get it. You should read it. It's going to teach you a lot. I thought I knew a lot of the stuff already, but I learned so much here.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I really appreciate that. Everything you're doing for our people and for being one of the only Jewish organizations that actually takes that, this issue so seriously. So I appreciate it, and keep up the amazing work, all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Happy Thanksgiving.